On this episode, we share our first impressions of the 2022 Toyota Corolla Cross, discuss why EVs might be particularly uncomfortable for taller drivers, and with the current red-hot used car market, we give tips on how to avoid buying a car that's been caught underwater in a flood. Next on Talking Cars. Hi, and welcome back. I'm Mike Quincy.
I'm Ryan Pidlakowski.
And I'm Jennifer Stockberger.
So, one of the most pressing automotive-related stories this week continues to be the after effects of the recent flooding from Hurricane Ida. And one of the topics that we're zoning in on is how it might be affecting cars and how you need to really be especially vigilant if you are in the used car market these days when you're going to shop now because, well, who knows how many of these cars have been affected by flooding. Jen, what is your take on this? What's your best advice?
Yeah, so this year in particular, so you have Ida, you have flooded vehicles. We've had flooded vehicles in the Northeast, which we rarely get this level of flooding, but we're experiencing it even here. The ground is just saturated. So what happens is typically those cars would have a title change that said salvaged flood vehicle, that would be reflected on their title. But there's this process that unscrupulous salespeople sometimes go through where they kind of title cleanse and get that reference removed. So in particular right now, the market, the inventory of used cars is very low. Used car pricing is very high. Never has there been a better time for the unscrupulous to get a better price on some vehicles that may have experienced flood damage. So if you are in the market for a used vehicle, even over the next year or so, because it's not uncommon for, say, a car to be moved from Louisiana to Connecticut, and be sold in a different region, you absolutely have to do some additional research. So there are resources where you can do that research, and I want to read it verbatim. The National Motor Vehicle Title Information System is one. VinCheck is another. Carfax is another. You may even want to pay a little bit and cross-reference the VIN you're looking at to be sure it is not one of these vehicles that had flood damage, was cleaned up very nicely, its title was cleansed, and now you're looking at paying a premium for a car that could give you trouble from that water damage, either immediately or later in its life. And there are actually checks. Ryan, I'll let you elaborate on some of the checks of the car you can do when you physically have it in your sights.
Right. Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of the rain. It's been a wet summer up here. And then, that last storm, Ida, comes through, and my sister had 4 feet of water in her basement. So there was some localized flooding over here, where, in town where I live. She lives just down the way. And, so her car was very close to being flooded, but it wasn't. But she's in a low area, so she's prone to it. But, as you mentioned, Jen, I mean, they're people want to sell cars. There's not a lot of used cars out there. And there's a whole industry dedicated to detailing and making cars look better than they did previous, right? I mean, when you buy a used car, even if it's not flooded, it goes through a heavy cleaning process. There's all kinds of products and procedures that they can do to make a car look better. But if it's flooded, you don't want to touch it because the water gets into places, especially when a car floods. There's outside pressure. When your car gets wet and it rains on it, there's no hydraulic pressure forcing water into areas where there shouldn't be water. When it floods, there's pressure pushing into all these areas. Electrical connections, I mean, we all know electricity and water don't mix, right? Even mechanical parts, corrosion, all kinds of other issues. But some things you can look for just, by yourself when you're looking at a used car now after these storms is, inspect. I'm going to go right through this list of stuff we have on our website on the story that was written about the flooded cars. Inspect the carpets. See if they've, you could smell if they've been waterlogged or if there's like a mud kind of a dusty caked kind of dirt in them. Usually floodwaters bring a fine silty sand and distribute it everywhere. And it's hard to clean. It's not hard to miss, though. You can see this. Check, the seats, where the seats are mounted. See if they've been removed. You can tell there's when a car's assembled. You sometimes can see where the paint on the bolts has been cracked, or you could tell if it's been off. Because it's not perfectly painted anymore, right? So you could check that to see if the seats have been removed. The headlights, like I said, water will force its way into areas where it shouldn't be. It will get inside the headlights. Cleaning inside of a headlight is nearly impossible. Especially modern headlights are pretty much a sealed assembly, but water can get in them, especially from the rear, where a lot of times the bulbs are replaced from. And just inspect hard to clean places where dirt wouldn't normally get, but it could get if water forced its way in with all that silty mud. Look at the ends, the heads of unpainted screws, like I mentioned, on the seats, anywhere else. I mean, if they might have taken the doors off or the hood, or anywhere to get in and clean, or replace something that might have been damaged by the water. But I think in general, the best thing you can really do is just really scrutinize the car. Go through everything you can. The Carfax is good, but I've heard that those can go both ways. People, like you said, Jen, people can fudge them and make them or erase things off of them. So it's a tough time to be buying a used car, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, cross-reference the different sources for the title check.
You have to be diligent, especially because they're not, and the prices are high. So you're gonna, they're commanding a decent price for any used car.
Yeah, I found it funny too when you said use your nose for the carpets, because the other option there is when it's heavily perfumed. Like, if you see 8 air fresheners, you might be cautioned that they're trying to hide something.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, not only the carpeting and the inside and the seats, but the trunk. Yes. I mean, open up the trunk and take a big whiff in, because that's a good indication of where water is going to accumulate, and especially if there's people haul around a whole bunch of stuff in their trunk all the time, that could have gotten soaked and whatnot. So the truth is that, the average person just using your nose is probably a good inspector, a better inspector of a used car than you think. And as we've talked about before on Talking Cars is, one of the reasons the used car market is so hot is because the new car market is super hot. The shortage of semiconductor chips is people are trying to buy a new car. They can't. So what do? They go to the used car market. So it really is, and forgive the pun, but it really is kind of a perfect storm right now of all these things coming together to make it a bit harder for car buyers. Yeah, great if you're a car seller, not so great if you're a car buyer. We're always updating this story about what to look for when it comes to flooded cars and used cars. Check it out at consumerreports.org, and we hope that you and yours have survived this storm and the continued after effects. And while it didn't hit the entire country, this hurricane, the after effects of the used car market can spread from coast to coast. So that's what's going on. That's a look at the weather. Now we're going to get to traffic. And the traffic that we've got going right now in Consumer Reports parking lot is what we're driving this week, and that is the 2022 Toyota Corolla Cross. Now, we've got a familiar name like Toyota, we've got a familiar name like Corolla, but now the Corolla Cross. So, Jen, give us a little background on this new spin on the Corolla.
Right. So following what we've talked about week after week, this idea of the small SUV being the spot for everybody's dollars. So this is Toyota's taking advantage of that venerable 50-year Corolla name and putting it on a small SUV. So the Corolla Cross kind of fitting in between the CHR and the RAV4. I think personally, it looks very much just like a mini Highlander. So, not crazy looks or anything. Recall that the CHR was never an all-wheel drive option. So to me, kind of misleading in its SUV shape. Nor was the CHR a favorite of ours in our testing or our members who bought it, because the owner satisfaction ratings on that car are very low. So I think this is a really good move for Toyota. So all-wheel drive, front-wheel drive options, a 169 horsepower 2-liter for CVT, $22,000 to $28,000, so very reasonably priced. Front-wheel drive versions are expecting 32 miles per gallon. Our Corolla sedan got 33 overall, 30 on the all-wheel drive. So I think this is a very important car because, as we've said time and time again, Toyota is very careful in how they implement things, which makes them so reliable. They don't put a bunch of launches together. They do iterations of their product rather than revolutions of their product. This, to me, feels like an iteration. If you're in a Toyota and you're happy with it, you are very likely going to be happy with the Corolla Cross. If you're expecting something super sporty or powerful or surprise and delight, you probably won't be happy with the Corolla Cross. We used words like straightforward to describe the controls and things. So, and I think the one area, if you're looking for a super quick or agile or powerful vehicle, you're probably not going to find it here. You know this 4 cylinders working when you need it to. You know it has a CVT, though obviously in general CVTs have gotten better. But I think if you're looking for basic, reliable, door-to-door transportation and you want an all-wheel drive SUV that has some versatility that's not too big, I think you'll be very happy with this. I don't know if you guys thought similar.
Well, I think that this Corolla Cross, it's kind of lost because it's not like a hot hatchback that gives you some kind of performance. It's not a hybrid that delivers incredible fuel economy, and it adds to yet another, hatchbacky Toyota. And listen, I love wagons. I love wagons, and this kind of like is a small wagon to me. But Toyota is selling, and I'm going to read the list here, as you mentioned, the CHR, the Corolla hatchback, the Prius, the RAV4, the Venza. These are all kind of like the same, 5-door hatchbacky kind of utility kind of vehicle. And as much of a fan of Toyotas that I am for all the reasons, Jen, that you just mentioned, reliability, lots of standard safety, I keep thinking to myself, my gosh, how oversaturated is, Toyota's hatchback lineup? I mean, how many more can they put on it? And these the ones that I mentioned are kind of a moderate size. These aren't, bigger vehicles like the Highlander, like the 4Runner, like the Land Cruiser, the Sequoia. So these are kind of reasonable vehicles, but in terms of driving, the steering was adequate. The power was adequate. It was reasonably responsive on our track. It's reasonably quiet. It doesn't get too noisy, except as you say, Jen, when you're really putting your foot into it.
I'm laughing at your words. Adequate.
But that's kind of what it. Yeah. That's kind of what it is. I mean, this vehicle it is not edgy at all, and for a lot of people, it's exactly right. It's perfect.
Jen actually brought up a good point. It looks like a kind of a mini Highlander, right? This is more along the veins of like a RAV4, as opposed to when you read the name Toyota Corolla Cross, you think, Corolla to me, I think of the little sedan, or when back in 2019 we tested the Corolla hatchback, which was super fun. I mean, that thing was almost like a GTI in a sense, not quite the power, but super fun to handling car. This isn't that. This is a vehicle to get from point A to point B with some utility, comfortably and efficiently. But it's just okay. It's not exciting, like you said. There's no edginess to it. The steering is a little blah. It got a little bit of body roll. It rides okay, but they might have sacrificed some of that handling for some of that ride. It's okay. Like you said, if you're a Toyota person, this is probably just fine for what you're looking for. It's not a overly exciting vehicle. The past RAV4 Prime, the regular RAV4 hybrid, the RAV4 hybrid, the regular RAV4, they do okay handling wise, but they're not high performers. But that's what they were intended to do. We haven't tested this at all. We haven't fully tested it, and we haven't done any high speed avoidance maneuver or track handling stuff with it. But Toyota in general, they might not have that exciting dynamic, but they're totally capable and easy to drive. There's nothing bad about them, but it's just the attitude of the car is a little less exciting than maybe something I would prefer. But I don't know. I think it's definitely better than the CHR. That car was not that great at all. And having the all-wheel drive option, I think, is key, because when you just look at a vehicle like of this shape, you would expect it to be able to at least be able to get it in all-wheel drive, I think.
Mike, you mentioned something too. This car, 22,000 to 28,000. All that standard safety. I have no doubt this will be a great car for a young driver. This will be a great car for an older driver. Super height, easy to get in and out of, kind of that Forester vein. But the Highlander, I would agree, it's probably a little too big for a lot of people. This mini Highlander is going to be awesome for a lot of people. And the expectation of all that reliability behind it.
The interior, I think like the controls, they kept everything nice and simple. Has a regular shifter. The touchscreen works nicely. It's all well laid out. Just simple. That goes a long ways nowadays for me, because it's just, these cars get so complicated. You could just jump in this and go. And like you said, Jen, it'd probably be a good car for teens, assuming, the reliability and everything works out. But
and this was a rented one.
Yes, for clarification, this was a car we rented from Toyota. That's what you're seeing in the B-roll of actually yours truly cruising around the track. And we're going to be buying our own test car soon, so check back. And also just one thing, and I don't want to belabor the point, but if you are a fan of Toyota, you are a fan of hatchbacks, Ryan, I was thinking about your comments about the Corolla hatchback, and I've driven the XSE versions of both the Corolla and the Corolla hatchback, and those are definitely edgier. There's definitely fun. There's a little bit more power. It's a little tighter driving feel, a little smaller than the Corolla Cross. But I think if you're a fan of Toyotas and you want a little bit more verve, a little bit more fun to drive, check out the XSE version of the Corolla hatch, which gives you a lot of this practicality, slightly smaller package, and it's kind of fun to drive. So we have kind of a preview of the Corolla Cross on consumerreports.org. Check it out and check back after we get our own test car and we start the whole process of testing yet another Toyota hatchback. So before, exactly, another one. So before we move on, we wanted to take a moment to let you know about the Talking Cars donation program. If you're not aware, Consumer Reports is a nonprofit organization. So all the work we do is funded by memberships as well as donations. If you're able to give, if you're able to read, it really does help keep us doing the work we're doing, especially this show. You can find out more information at cr.org/give talking cars. And that's basically us saying, hey, keep the funding coming in so we can keep this program and everything that we do at Talking Cars and Consumer Reports. We want to keep it going. So anyway, that's the business side. Let's get into some stuff that we really love doing, and that's taking your questions. We love your questions. Keep them coming. Text, video, Morse code, smoke signals, ESP, telepathy, snail mail, everything. Send us your questions. The talkingcars@icloud.com. It's talkingcars@icloud.com. The challenge for me is always, how can I add yet another version of how you can contact us to this promotion, which I'm sure super producer Dave Abrams is completely sick of, but I'm doing it anyway. So anyway, the first question up, we have a video question from James.
Hey, Talking Cars. Love the podcast. I'm looking at getting a new-to-me car within the next year or so. Specifically, I'm looking at the 2019 redesign of the Mazda 3. And while searching online, not only did I see it's a Consumer Reports recommended vehicle, which is fantastic, but also that there's a refresh coming for the 2022 model year. What's the difference between a redesign and a refresh? Also, since I'm on Team Save the Manual, having learned on this 2012 John Cooper Works Mini, what's the difference between the all-wheel drive drivetrain and the manual drivetrain on the Mazda 3? Lastly, I was hoping that Jake Fisher or Mike Quincy, as fellow cyclists, might have some insight into stuffing a modern mountain bike with 29-inch tires into the back of a Mazda 3, because I have similar opinions on bike racks to them, and I can barely fit my giant Trance X into the back of my 2014 Kia Soul. Just barely. Thanks so much, and keep talking cars.
So, James, we are a big fan of the Mazda 3. You have a lot of layers in the question, so I'm going to try to get to as much of it as I can. You talked about a refresh of the Mazda 3 for 2022. We actually contacted Mazda, and they say that the 3 is actually not going to be refreshed for this upcoming model year. So just so you know about that, what you're seeing right now is what you're going to see next year as well. All-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive, the turbo engine. The all-wheel drive is automatic only. So I know you're a big fan of saving the manuals and man after my heart. That's awesome. But so you have to keep in mind that if you want all-wheel drive, you have to give up shifting yourself. Ryan, what else do you have? I mean, he makes a good question. He asks a good question. What's the difference between a refresh and a redesign? So we hear this a lot. What do you have to say for James?
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep it simple. I mean, a refresh, typically, we deal with this a lot. When we buy new cars to test, the first thing we usually comes to mind is like, all right, is this thing all new, or is it like just, did they fix a few things? So a refresh is usually just fixing a few things. It's still the same, fchassis, same engine probably. They might tweak, change the transmission shifting points maybe a little bit, fix some of the infotainment stuff, maybe change some controls, maybe a different seat, something like that. Or even if it's a facial, just a quick, like change some body panels or whatever. So, and then a redesign is completely new from the ground up. So, all the way right from the chassis, they might use different materials, stiffen suspension, soften suspension, change sway bars, anything, all the way through the motor, everything. So a redesign is we consider that, I mean, it might still be a Camry, but it's it's a new Camry. Like it could be different, quite a bit different than the last Camry, where a refreshed Camry should be pretty close, but maybe a little better because they tweaked some things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of people say, do you, I mean, I've been asked this question, do you retest all the cars every single year? And it's like, of course we don't, because, well, we can't. And there is a big difference between some exterior, interior, styling updates as opposed to a clean sheet redesign. And because the car companies can't afford to redesign their cars. I mean, it costs a whole lot of money to redesign something from the ground up.
Right.
So, but that was an excellent question. We get that a lot. But Jen, he also asked about the likelihood of us testing a manual.
Yeah, so James, unfortunately, probably not, because quite frankly, the U.S. market right now is not like yourself. They're not opting for manuals, and our best bang for our buck in testing vehicles is to get the one that's most representative of what the U.S. market will buy, and that's usually not a manual. That's not to say we might not experience it through a vehicle we rent, for example, and be able to kind of allude to it in our writing, but you won't see our formal tests of manual vehicles unless they're typically purchased that way, something more sporty, for example. But chances are we probably won't be testing a manual. Here's a good quiz for you. What was the last manual we tested? That was true manual, not sequential, not paddles, not... Any ideas? I looked. I think I have it.
Did you look?
I looked.
Oh, man.
Any ideas?
I was thinking it might have been the Fiata, the Fiat Mazda Spider.
Yeah.
That might have been one of the more recent ones.
I think it's the Civic Si. Wasn't that? I think that was the last manual.
Okay.
That's sad. I have to rack my brain that much to think about how far back. I mean, we use those Toyota 86s for tire testing, and then we had tested the last 86, but that was before those. 'Cause we've been using those for a while, but yeah, they're far and few between these days.
I did kind of a cursory because I couldn't remember. I did kind of what's the last manual, and just kind of went backwards in the sporty car segment, and that one popped up. But yeah,
it's a good trivia question, and I'm holding out hope that when Volkswagen redesigns the next generation of the GTI. Right. I think every GTI that I think Consumer Reports tests has been a manual transmission. So I'm hoping they keep the fire burning for that, and we we storm the palace of the offices of Jake Fisher and Gabe Shenhard saying we have to do a manual.
I don't think you'll need to storm their palace very hard.
They're an easy sell. You're right about that.
Jake Fisher, should we do a manual? Why, yes. Yeah, that's not all you want to say.
The last part of James' question has to do with bike racks, and glad to see you're in solidarity of hating bike racks as much as I do. So the question, will a large mountain bike fit in the back of a Mazda 3? I don't have one on hand to actually physically try it. I'm thinking it will, as long as you take off the front wheel. You mentioned you being able to transport your mountain bike in the back of a Kia Soul. I've also done that with my road bike, so I get it. But again, the wheel has to come off. You get the majority of the bike in, and you find a place for the wheel. And that's probably how it's going to work out. But I suppose, if you want to bring your bike to a dealer and say, do you mind if I try something? I mean, they might, maybe they'll let you do it.
And I think you should do it. I think if that's an important part of your life, you should bring your bike to the dealer and try it.
It's shocking sometimes how big a 29-inch mountain bike is with the, just try to get in a car. It seems so big. And like I just had the Land Rover Defender. You mentioned this, I think, even Quinn. But I had it as well. And I went to I have a 29-inch mountain bike. And I went to put it in there and I was like, wow, this doesn't really fit in there. And that's a pretty big opening in the back. And it's a decent sized vehicle. It's not huge inside, but the room goes quick. But you take the front wheel off and that goes a long way.
Yeah, no, the Defender is deceiving at how big it looks, but actually how kind of small the storage space is. But anyway, James, glad to hear that you're thinking along the same lines as a bunch of us, and a great video, by the way. Thanks a lot. Next up is Anthony from Florida. Multiple times a week, I encounter drivers at night without their headlights on. However, many drivers have told me that they thought they were on because of how bright their LED daytime running lights are. I've seen this happen with lots of Jeep Cherokees and Nissan Rogues. Does something like this concern you, and have you ever noticed this yourselves? Jen, headlight expert extraordinary, what do you got for Anthony?
So, Anthony, you are not the first person to notice this and ask this question. So what's happening? It used to be, again, going back a little bit, when you turned your headlights on, when it got dark, that is when all your dash lights came on. Well, we're living in a world now where there's a lot of dash lights on, including big screens that are on all the time. So you're missing that kind of visual prompt of, oh, it's dark now, I need to turn my lights on. It's also not uncommon for people to not turn their headlights on when the area around them is well lit. You go where there's lots of stores or overhead lighting, or you're in a parking lot. It's not uncommon for people to forget to turn their lights on there as well until they get where it's a little darker. The other thing that's happening is much more common to have auto headlights. Keep in mind, those only will come on when that dial is set to auto. There's always typically another option that puts your headlights on, but it's not auto. So make sure if you have auto headlights that they're coming on. So it's interesting. It's definitely happening with the kind of influx of lighting that's in the cabin. There was just a regulation passed in Canada, so they must be saying the same thing as well, that says a car must have one of the following. One, tail lights that come on with your daytime running lights, so to make you that much more conspicuous. Headlights, tail lights, and side marker lights that turn on automatically in the dark, kind of this auto headlight idea, or a dashboard that stays dark until you turn your headlights on. Again, getting back to that visual prompt. We do not have a standards update like that yet in the United States, but I agree with you. I think there's some confusion over what the little icons mean too. You'll have the one that says your DRLs are on, but you really need the one that says your low beam headlights are on. So again, another touch of automation making us a little less engaged with something that's obviously key. So, go through your car next time you're going out. We're getting close to daylight savings time again, when we're all, driving a little more in the dark. Make sure your auto headlights are on if you have them. Make sure what your dash is doing when your headlights are on, and, just be diligent about making sure they're on. Yes, DRLs help, but again, daytime running lights, not nighttime running lights. So good question.
It's good that we have Jen Stockberger here to shed light on this. So anyhow, Moving on.
You had
For
to.
sure. For sure.
All right, let's hear from Todd from Ohio. I'm 6'8" tall and don't really drive sedans anymore because they're too close to the ground. To fit in my Jeep Grand Cherokee and Nissan Pathfinder, I electronically lower the driver's seat as low as possible. I'm interested in EV SUVs. Who isn't these days? How is there room for tall drivers in EVs, such as the Ford Mach-E, Volkswagen ID4, and Tesla Model Y? So, Ryan, please, give us some tall tales.
Oh, goodness.
Oh boy. So 6'8". My word. You are tall, my friend. That's a tall man. I'm 6'2", and I do some of the seat tall. I'm the tall guy for some of the seat stuff. It's interesting to see what cars you fit in and don't fit in. But there has been a trend, and I will say, at least I've noticed with EVs that there isn't a lot of the EV, at least, and especially the sedans and the smaller cars, that their headroom is snug in these in general. Just from my own investigations, the EVs have a battery in the floor. A lot of these cars, so a regular car, the way it's built, it's the bottom pan where where the seat is attached to is sheet metal, and it's underneath that sheet metal is a few inches and then the road. If it's a unibody car, there's not a lot there, so there's more room to sink a seat down into that area. When you have an EV has a battery in it, so there's a layer of the floor that is taken up by battery. They're not all the same, but for the most part, a lot of these EVs that have a bigger battery is using the whole floor area, like a Tesla per se. So what happens is a seat now sits on top of that battery. It doesn't sit down in that hole where it was in a traditional car, let's say. So you run out of some headroom. But these, the ones he mentions, the Mach-E, the ID4, and the Model Y are more hatchback SUV-ish. So they're a little bit taller in the roof, which helps. These three that he mentions are okay for taller people. You have to go sit in these cars yourself.
What's interesting is we could probably spend half of a podcast talking about setting the driving position for all the cars.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But Jen, really, there's also a safety factor in all this, right?
Yes, and Ryan alluded to it when he said, if your legs can reach. So two things that kind of tie driving position and comfort even to safety. If you are uncomfortable and continuously moving, fidgeting, etc., to get your ideal driving position, that's probably distracting you from being attentive to your driving. The other thing, as Ryan said, is reach. Be it leg reach to the pedals, distance to the wheel, ability to react to something in an emergency situation appropriately and quickly relates to your driving position. So I can't reiterate what Ryan said enough, is go sit in any car, particularly at your height, to make sure it fits you and that you have decent reach and comfort at 6'8". That's tough.
So we have a recently updated story at consumerreports.org, and that's best cars and SUVs for tall people. Ryan, thanks so much. A great, very thorough answer. And that brings us to our last question, and this is Adam in San Diego. I often hear you talk about how CR just purchased a brand new vehicle for review, and I'm wondering how you decide which vehicles to buy, how long you keep them, and what you do with them when you are done. So, Jen, this is a question that I honestly get asked, every other week, especially the last part. So what do you have for Adam?
So truthfully, Adam, Gabe Shenhar is the main man for this job who does the deciding. So it kind of harkens back to a couple questions we just answered in the episode. One is the vehicle new or changed sufficiently, redesigned, or some significant area that they've improved upon that would be reflected in our tests? Suspension, drivetrain, powertrain, something big. So then it gets put on the list. Gabe works very hard, and I think we've alluded to before, we actually have some pretty good technical exchanges and market exchanges with the manufacturers. So the question then becomes, of all the trims, which is the one that we believe and the manufacturer believes will have the highest take rate. How do we test a vehicle that's most representative of that model? Sometimes we will do multiples, a hybrid or an electric powertrain versus a regular gas powertrain, for example. But in picking the trim and the options that vehicle has, it's a lot of Gabe's work. That's what he's deciding in each new model year. It goes back to the manual. If the manual's not the highest take rate, we're probably not testing the manual. It's why we supplement with the rented vehicles to get some different impressions at some times. We also, at times you'll see like a very high-end vehicle come through our test program. Those typically are the ones that are either setting a new precedent in terms of performance in a certain area, or they have some new technology that we've never been exposed to that we certainly want to be able to talk to you about. So at times, people say, what the heck are you buying that $100,000 Mercedes S-Class for? Well, the Mercedes S-Class may have something like, just in my world, night vision or adaptive driving being that hasn't yet trickled down to the mainstream, but we certainly want to expose ourselves to. So that's kind of where we are. When we keep them, depending on when we get them and how they fit the program, anywhere between 3 months to a year. Between 10 and 20,000 miles we usually put on them. Because remember, we're using them as well in our daily lives. And ultimately, we sell them. So we sell them through a number of different outlets. Our employees can buy them. We've traded them in. We send them to auction. Public figures, friends and family of our employees have purchased the cars. They're technically a good used car at that point. Market pricing, so they are up for sale. And then we are able to recoup some of our investment in those vehicles each year. It's changed a little bit. The model has changed in that, think of something like a Tesla that now gets over-the-air updates. We may hold on to those Teslas, for example, much longer than we used to because they can update the car and change the mapping and the transmission and safety features over the air. And I expect we may see that more so going forward.
Mm-hmm. And my family is one that has purchased test cars. Believe it or not, my wife is still driving the 2002 Camry XLE. A V6 model. Oh, it's like a future hot rod, right? And my mother also bought a Subaru Outback back in the day. But that question, what do you do with the test cars when you're done with them? I swear I get it all the time. Great question, and hopefully, we're just going to keep answering the same question a few more times. Anyway, well, listen. That's about going to do it for this episode. As always, check the show notes for more information about the vehicles and the topics that we discussed. And just a reminder, please keep the questions coming. talkingcars@icloud.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next week.